Kaizen issue 39, the silver dollar, gratitude, optimism, and noticing the yellow. What caught you off guard or made you think about something as you were reading the issue?
Yeah, this was a good episode or a good issue of yours. And I think the one thing that caught me off guard, which I wasn't expecting to think about, was trying to see the good. I guess you might say the silver lining in an otherwise dark cloud.
Oh, that was a missed opportunity.
The trying to
Silver dollar, silver lining.
yeah, exactly. But yeah, trying to see the what you should have gratitude for, even around other negative things in your life. And so that was an interesting take on the issue of gratitude. And otherwise, yeah, I found it useful in the sense that, as per usual, you include a few little life hacks, a little mental shortcuts
Yeah.
in the episode, which is one of your common literary devices. But
Yeah, I try to keep it practical or tangible, at least in some sense. Like, it's easy to get really like clouded in philosophy and it's just really abstract and theoretical. So I try to at least keep some of it grounded and like, here's something you can actually do.
yeah, I agree. Yeah, but in terms of like when I read through the whole thing, that was probably the one thing that really I was like, huh. Try to see the good in an otherwise negative aspect or negative experience in your life. So it's like
Yeah.
interesting.
So that made you think, was there a moment where you were thinking, yeah, but like, was there a moment where you sort of had a bit of natural pushback or had like a sort of, like you agreed with what I was saying, but then you thought of something that was an exception to what I was saying, or maybe not in this circumstance, it wouldn't work.
Not necessarily. I mean, because generally, I think it's a useful exercise for us to go through, because I think that in general, we don't actually um, focus on the positive things in our life. We, like you mentioned in the article, like the news um, tends to
Skew
focus on
negatively.
negative
Yeah.
things. I read the news all the time with my work, and so if the business news was, oh, today stock market went up by 0.1% and it's on track to be up 1% this month, and the economy is plugging along normally, and the stock market should do 10% this year and be otherwise pretty normal and drama free. Well, that's not going to sell any papers. You have to have like
Yeah.
the chance of recession, the chance of a crash, or all sorts of other like negative things. And the same with other news. I mean, there's a reason why one of the most popular genres in podcasting is true crime dramas, because people like to hear about
Horror stories.
horror stories. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I mean, I
So
something I definitely see a lot is like everyone, especially in the news and relating to finance, everyone like hyper fixates on the micro movements of the markets or whatever's happening in the world. Like something happens and it's just like even like a shift in the trends over one day or over one week and it's blown into like, oh, we're going to be entering a recession now or something. Like I feel like I've heard the phrase we're entering a recession like every week or almost every day for the last 2 years.
a famous economist once said that the stock market has successfully predicted 9 of the last 5 recessions,
Yeah,
and that
that's a good
is
one.
and that's basically the case for all sorts. That premise can be applied to all sorts of aspects.
Yeah.
Um, for example, I went to a lecture like literally last week on Canada-U.S. relations, and so we tend to fixate on the fact that uh, the orange tyrant is somehow unique, and yeah, in many ways he is unique and uniquely bad. But Canada-U.S. relations have had ebbs and flows, ups and downs
Like the history
for
of
the
the whole,
entire
yeah,
history, going back to when Benjamin Franklin tried to convince Quebec to leave what was even before Canada existed, but leave the genesis of Canada and join the United States. So this goes back 250 years, basically, in terms of
yeah,
the um, tumultuous relationship between Canada and the United States. Similarly, the U.S. just invaded Venezuela and is threatening other countries, including this one. Um, but again, this is not new. I mean, the U.S. has invaded just in my lifetime. I could think of a dozen countries where the U.S. has actually had actual invasions, and then another dozen countries where they've been, doing all sorts of other shady stuff as well. So going back to Grenada and Panama,
yeah,
Nicaragua, obviously Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya. Like it goes on and on and on. So yeah, this does seem kind of different, but I guess what I'd say is not necessarily new. So.
yeah. Different but not new. So, for people who don't know that are listening, you are a financial advisor. And one question I was curious about is you work with people's money and their anxieties about money a lot. And I was curious if that affected how you viewed this issue and if this piece landed differently because of that lens that you have through your work.
It does, yeah, in the sense that I mean, my clients are all or have a lot of gratitude. Like they really thank me for my stewardship, but also they're just very thankful for the position that they're in because they see their friends, their neighbors, maybe some family members, and they feel very fortunate for where their situation in life and the fact that they're able to do a lot of things that they never really dreamed was possible decades ago. And through discipline and saving and hard work, they've been able to put themselves in positions where they do have a lot to be thankful for, and they recognize that too. So.
Cool. I guess that they get to invest in companies they believe in and sort of make a positive impact through their own wealth would be like an aspect of it.
That's another part of it too. Yeah, we do have a lot of clients that want to put their money where their mouth is, that want to invest in things that they believe in, that don't want to invest in for example, countries that are uh, call it misaligned, I guess I might say, with Western values, with democratic values.
Yeah.
And I've got other clients that don't want to invest in companies that are doing things to contribute to climate change, for example, or that are investing in tobacco or whatnot.
Yeah.
So yeah, we do have a lot of clients that are again very to lean on the theme of your most recent piece on gratitude. Yeah, that are very thankful that they can put their money in a place that allows them to sleep at night as well. So.
Yeah. So is that most of your clients are through this grateful lens, or do you see some of your clients who are sort of stuck in the red frame that I was talking about in my issue, where it's easy to just notice the red in your life, and when you're focused on the red, it's hard to notice the yellow. And when you sort of retrain your attention, you can step back and sort of realize the yellow that's always been there in your life. Do you see a lot of clients who are stuck in this red frame, or is it more complicated than that?
Well, it's definitely more common now, I would say. The to blend the yellow and the red gets you orange, and as we all know, the orange man down south
Yeah.
is he commands attention and
Occupies a lot of people's
occupies a lot.
headspace.
He's living rent free in a lot of people's headspace, and yeah, he's doing all kinds of stuff that I don't agree with, but um, and I do find lots of clients, they do tend to focus on that red or that orange, I guess you might say, that red aspect of life, on the negativity and on the potential things that that he could be doing and things that he has done already, and they just sort of mentally apply that to, the larger world, and therefore the economy, and therefore the stock market. And I have to always remind folks that, yeah, I don't like what he's doing with a number of things, whether it's immigration or whether it's tariffs or whether it's abandoning democratic allies or this kind of stuff.
Yeah, any one
Um,
specific issue.
but but that doesn't necessarily mean that we have to sort of just be fearful of everything. And I'm reminding clients that uh, that actually it's, probably from a portfolio perspective, like from the markets, it's likely going to be okay. And of course, not just to fixate on Trump, but in terms of AI, for example, that's been a huge theme the past couple of years. And a lot of people are pretty fearful, and see a lot of the red around that too, in terms of
Yeah,
its impact on the economy, its impact on the job market, and its impact on civilization, on people in general. And and yet, I also have to remind them that, as far as the market's concerned, actually, it could be quite a beneficial thing, in terms of the efficiencies gained, in terms of its impact on driving down inflation, like technology tends to do, and therefore its ability to, to basically drive the stock market forward. Um, the stock market's always, the economy in general is always in a sense of what they call creative destruction, where there's, where the horse and buggy gave way to automobiles, and the internet gave way, chipped away at a ton of traditional brick and mortar retail businesses, and this kind of stuff. Like, there's always a whole range of
yeah,
industries and jobs that get destroyed, but then new ones get created as well. Um, Now, I don't want to sound all just like totally optimistic, but because there's definitely potential for some real problems in the next several years, in terms of job losses in a whole wide range of sectors all at the same time. And there's definitely cause for concern around that. But
yeah,
all I'm saying is that life is not all red. There's definitely some yellow. If we all we have to do is try and look for it. So,
yeah, for sure. And speaking of yellow, especially at this larger scale, there was that one section in the issue where I was writing about global trends. I think it was called "You Won the Lottery," and I was talking about how literacy rates are going up, poverty rates are at an all-time low, crime, democracy, like many things trend positively, but it's on such a slow and broad time horizon that no one really notices it or really thinks about it. And it doesn't make the news. Like, there's no headline that comes out that says, oh, literacy rates are up 0.3% today. Like, that's not a thing that gets broadcasted. So I guess I was wondering where that framing breaks down for you in terms of, are there domains where the trend line actually goes the wrong direction, or is it more that the distribution is uneven?
oh well, there's definitely always cases of an unequal distribution, and yeah, some things, the trend line does go in the wrong direction for sure. Um, but yeah, I do think that there are, yeah, that section actually did kind of grab me, in the sense that there are, we did win the lottery just by being born in Canada. Basically, we're in the top, call it 10% of the world, I guess you might say, when you include Canada, Australia, New Zealand, US, Western Europe, Japan. Yeah, it's a little more than 10% of the world's population, but not much more.
Yeah,
Just by being born into that segment of the world, we're already in the top 10% in terms of wealth, in terms of opportunities, in terms of freedoms.
Quality of life.
and therefore, and all of those things combined for quality of life. So yeah, we're already in, just by being born there, you're in the top 10%. And then, of course, if you look back at, say, it's also time and place. It's not just place. So the timing of being alive in this time as well, we have access to far better medical technology than even existed 10 years ago, let alone 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. So, and on top of that, the quality of other experiences too. Yeah. So we are the sort of in the freest part of the world, in the wealthiest time that existed, with the best technology, and um, in many ways the best quality of life. I mean, obviously, some people would argue with that, and I understand that, but I mean, in many ways, the best quality of life, both in terms of time and place. So yeah, we did kind of win the lottery that way. So
Yeah, I
I
mean,
agree.
I think a big problem, it's not really even a problem, it's just a fact of human nature is that we're really good at adapting. And as soon as we sort of raise the bar in terms of technology or wealth or standard of living, we get used to it really quickly. Like it's easy to forget that the things that we have today didn't even like weren't even conceivably an idea in someone's brain like 50 years ago. Like we just take it for granted so easily, the fact that we have the internet and we can just look up whatever we want at any point in time, pretty much anywhere in the world. Like even, if you have data, or now you can even get like a Starlink, you could be in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean and look up information on how to survive where you currently are, which is
Hmm.
crazy. Like we just take these things for granted because we're so good at adapting. We're so good at taking the things that we create as humans and just being like, okay, this is the new normal now. Let's strive for more. And
I agree.
gratitude is kind of stepping back from that and realizing, wait, just hold down a second. Let's appreciate how far we've come because we have so much already. And it's not to say we shouldn't strive for more, but it's just constantly striving for more can put you in a place of feeling like now is always bad and the future is like making things better is what we need to strive for. But sometimes things are already good. They can always be better, but sometimes things are already good.
It does help to sort of ground yourself, or to anchor yourself, and remind yourself that we're pretty fortunate,
Yeah,
and that helps to give one the proper perspective for doing those things that you talked about, in terms of like trying to strive forward and improve and make things better. Totally agree. But it also helps to kind of know where you're at before you're pushing forward with where you're going to go to as well.
yeah. So in this piece, I'm arguing that attention is the real scarcest resource, more than time. And I'm just curious, in your work, do you see people constrained by attention or by something else like access or capital or information?
Attention definitely is one of the scarcest of resources. So yeah, I did like the way your piece, you used gratitude as an example of, almost as an example of, how one should frame one's attention, basically, or how one should direct one's attention.
Yeah,
Because gratitude is, you feel gratitude when you actually pay attention to, like I say, the things that have gone well for you up to this moment. So that, I found that quite useful. But yeah, attention. But it's so therefore it kind of touched on the broader theme of attention, and um, attention is absolutely, um, well, both a scarce commodity, but it's also one that, we're constantly being pulled in 100 directions
it's very high leverage.
all at once.
Yeah,
And in my work, yeah, definitely attention is very much the case. I'll have a half dozen uh, client requests on various things, whether it's needing some money or whether it's they got some money to invest or whether it's um, you know contributions going into this account or that account or making sure they have enough income, or it goes on and on, all just in terms of client requests. At the same time, stock market's either going up or down that day, and that sort of got my attention, focused a little bit in that direction. And on top of that, now I have to worry about, the are there tax changes, or are there changes happening to the regulatory environment, or it kind of goes on and on, right? So yeah, attention very much is that's my daily battle, is where to focus my attention, and therefore how to check off all the things that need to get done during the day, but also making sure clients are focusing their attention on the things that actually matter, because we do tend to really get fixated on the shiny object, which is in the here and now, without actually worrying about longer term trends and longer term um, longer term things that aren't really part of our attention, but that should be part of our longer term consciousness, I guess, that should be keeping these things in mind, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely easy to get pulled around um, just by everything that goes on in life. But yeah, attention, that's what I was trying to get at with the noticing the yellow section was attention is so valuable. And since you're getting pulled around by so many different aspects of life, it's really useful to sort of train your attention through something. And that's where this idea of gratitude and actually the silver dollar as sort of like a token comes in,
Mm-hmm.
because it's an interrupt. Just having that object in your pocket that's always there. I mean, it's in my pocket right now.
I was going to ask you about that, actually, so
Yeah,
that's good.
it's an interrupt that forces you to step back, and it sort of slowly rewires your attention, and not just your attention, but like your ability, sort of like your self-awareness, or like your ability to step back and pull yourself out of the moment. Not out of the moment, sort of more like into the moment, really,
Right.
because your brain's kind of always just going, and it's really easy to just sort of forget to be grateful, or to just forget to take a moment to like be mindful in the present. And I think just the silver dollar, just or it can be anything, but just like the object that acts as an interrupt is really powerful, because it sort of forces you to work on your attention in these little moments throughout the day.
Mm-hmm. I couldn't have said it better. Yes. No, I thought the silver dollar was a good. Well, because yeah, it's big enough that you can't. Well, it's small enough that it can go. You can go hours without noticing it's there, but it's big enough that every once in a while you'll notice it, and it'll trigger a reminder in your mind uh, to um, to sort of stop what you're doing and focus on what actually matters. Which, so in this case, it's gratitude, but it could be other things too. In terms of, like, it could be a reminder of, oh, what do I need to think? What do I need to really worry about in terms of the larger, more important goals I have, and did I get anywhere closer to those today or this week or this weekend? Um, so yeah, so in this case, you're focusing on attention towards gratitude, but um, it could be also a little reminder about, oh yeah, I really did want to achieve this goal or this goal, and have I gotten any closer to that today, for example, as opposed to just just allowing the schedule and routine to run my life, rather than allowing rather than larger goals to actually take precedence. So
Hmm. I think it's an interesting idea. I don't actually really use it in that way. I think I save my longer time horizon reflection for like journaling, um, or when I'm meditating or something, because I try and use the coin as more of like a here and now type of thing. Like I don't use it to think about the future because that pulls me out of the moment.
Mm.
But it sort of blends like mindfulness and gratitude is how I mainly use it. It's just like, I'm walking along and I feel it thump against my leg in my pocket. Or I put my hands in my pocket and it's like, oh yeah, it's there. Or even if I'm just like sitting and I rest my hands on my legs and I can feel it outlined in my pants. Like any of those moments, just take a second and like I try to remind myself to be grateful of one thing in the moment here and now. But even if I don't do that, I just use it as an opportunity to like ground myself. I think a phrase Chris Williamson uses a lot, which I really like, is making your head and your body in the same place at once, like
Mm.
your feet and your mind.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's probably the best explanation of like a moment of mindfulness is just sort of stopping for a second,
I agree.
and then that's about it.
No, I think it's great. Mindfulness is another thing that's in very short supply nowadays. So I think that's great. I think that's a great exercise to go through for sure.
Yeah. So I think this might be one of my most vulnerable points is that I'm claiming optimism is rational because the data supports it. As I've read about in like Ray Kurzweil's book, The Future is Nearer. Sorry, The Singularity is Nearer,
Mm.
which is where I got most of these statistics on literacy rates going up, poverty rates going up, and sort of the argument for why optimism is a rational point of view. But couldn't someone equally argue that pessimism is rational because it's a hedge against disappointment or that it motivates caution against bad outcomes?
Interesting. Uh, it's easy to be pessimistic for sure. Um, you know, I tend to focus a bunch of my time on otherwise pessimistic things because I do worry about what happens when millions of people might lose their jobs due to AI all at the same time in a wide variety of sectors, and compounding that with robotics at the same time. So we're going to have blue collar jobs and white collar jobs being lost in droves. And all one has to do is go back to literally 4 years ago when inflation ramped up due to COVID coming out of its pandemic phase, and us being able to sort of reopen economies, and everybody wanted to go off and do things they weren't able to do for 2 3 years, and the inflation that caused. So what I'm saying is a relatively small amount of economic pain um, ended up leading to all sorts of negative things, such as the re-election of a convicted felon in the United States. Um, and then you look at the rise of far right parties like, say, AFD or others throughout Europe, um, and all of which is caused by economic angst and otherwise and other and social upheaval that way. If all of this happened, so what I'm saying is AI could easily lead one to could lead to an economic situation where where one could get quite pessimistic around the direction of the country. Climate change hasn't been solved. Yes, there haven't been some massive natural disasters, but the general trend is still very worrisome around climate change. So, um, one could easily be pessimistic around that. Species loss, habitat loss, all of these things have not just gone away, and so and then on top of that, the erosion of democracy, both in the U.S. and also in parts of Europe as well. So yeah, one could be pessimistic, quite easily, especially the more you read, the more you do scroll, the more you it's almost like the more you know, the more freaked out you are, and if you're not freaked out, it's because you're not paying attention, right? So, but uh, I think I'm generally an optimistic person, and as my base case, and so when I'm worried about various things, I tend to use that as a way to focus my attention, and maybe I combat pessimism through action, I guess, through doing things. I guess I've always been oriented that way, for my life.
Yeah, I think that's a good frame, and that's actually what I was getting at with a lot of my framing around optimism in the issue was that pessimism is basically the flip side of optimism in terms of how there's always stuff to be worried about. There's always uncertainty in the world. And that the uncertainty is pretty much where it all stems from in terms of the problems that we have, because our brains love certainty, and the uncertainty, whether it's in the stock markets or the climate, democracy, events in the world, disasters, war, it's all tied into uncertainty. And what I was arguing in the issue is that I think optimism is when you sit with the uncertainty and you just sort of acknowledge it. You're like, yep, it's there, but you don't let it control you. And I think pessimism is when you let the uncertainty sort of leak into your life and you sort of let it spiral downwards. Where you're just like, this could happen, and this could happen, and this could happen, and this could happen. And you let it sort of bog you down. And I think they both sit with the uncertainty, but the pessimism sort of spirals into the uncertainty,
Hmm.
and the optimism is sort of standing up in the face of the uncertainty.
Yeah, I mean, I've been investing client money. It's now January, so it's now been 28 years that I've been investing client money, and investing my own money for a few more years before that. So I've been, there's always something to worry about. Always. Whether it was the tech wreck, whether it was 9/11, whether it was the mortgage crisis in the United States, which was about 18 years ago now. Kind of goes on and on and on. There's always something to be worried about. There's always a reason to not invest, I guess I would say. There's always a reason to be cautious and just hold cash. But that would more often than not be a bad strategy, because through all of that, the stock market goes up around 10% per year. Through all of that, yeah, we have we humans are very dynamic, and we're very creative, and um, we have a way of solving problems that come our way, or of finding solutions. You know, for example, 40 years ago, acid rain was a massive problem, and yet, Canada and the U.S. and other countries got together and said, okay, well, we're going to come up with solutions to limit the amount of sulfur dioxide that goes into the atmosphere, and therefore cut back on acid rain. There was a massive hole that formed every year in the over the northern pole, over the north and south poles, due to CFCs, uh, which were in aerosols typically, and other things too, but mostly aerosols. Countries around the world found a way to limit their use. We do, and all sorts of other technology. I mean, I don't want to be a techno optimist too much, because that can just basically be an excuse for doing nothing, basically. But I do also recognize that technology and and humans do have an ability to come up with solutions that may not be so obvious in the here and now, but actually that in the end we're very adaptive as a species.
Yeah,
Pardon me.
adaptability, as I was talking about earlier, it's definitely one of the core sort of like aspects of humans, and it definitely is. I think it's a good argument for the case of being optimistic about the trajectory of humanity because, I mean, think about all of the wars and the injustices and the suffering that humanity has inflicted upon itself for the hundreds of thousands of years that we've been on Earth. I mean, we're still here. For all of that, we still haven't wiped ourselves out yet. So, I mean, that's pretty crazy. we've
Yeah.
we've survived. We survived a lot.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, and as you know, as I'm now in my fifth decade here, I remember very well the starvation and malnutrition that was happening fairly regularly in Africa, and also in India, and also in parts of South America. And yeah, that does happen. I'm going thinking about 40 years ago, and that does happen from time to time now, generally through because of conflict or because of political. It's not because we're growing. It's not because we're not growing enough food. We're growing plenty of food for all the people that here are here now. So
I mean, yeah,
yeah,
there's more people who are obese in the world than there are people starving now.
yes. Now we have
An
now
abundance
now
problem.
now we don't have a shortage of food. We have a shortage of GLP-1. It seems like so. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's more it's it's always been a question of distribution, and yet there are less people starving to death now than at any time in the past.
Of human
Uh,
history in
I was
general,
going to say
really.
in the past few centuries, but really you can go back to human history. I mean the Russians literally starved 20 million Ukrainians to death um, a century ago. Um, there were millions of people that were on the brink of starvation in East Africa just 40 years ago. Um, when Chairman Mao decided that he wanted to make a great leap forward with his country, uh, millions, tens of millions of people in China starved to
Yeah.
death because of all this. And only just fairly recently, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 20 years ago, roughly, in North Korea, millions were on the brink of starvation because of Kim Jong Un's dad's policies. Like it just there's been we tend to be pretty myopic and only look at the here and now, but actually in the grand scale of things, in terms of if you only have to go back and look 20 30 years ago to look at how much worse things were in many parts of the world than they are today. I mean, I'm not saying we solved every problem, but
Yeah.
um, I think that there's more of a case for optimism than for pessimism. And yes, it's easy to get pessimistic, but I, I guess I just remind myself about what actually happened. You only need to watch some movies about World War I or World War II to realize, you know, um, how bad things really have been in the past, which was not that long ago. I mean, there are still lots of people alive even now that were around in World War II. There's not very many left, but there still are. But it's not that long ago, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Um,
One or two people ago.
yeah, one or two generations back. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, one of the statistics that really stuck with me when I was reading Ray Kurzweil's The Singularity is Nearer is the one about the agriculture industry and how vastly, like, just completely revolutionized it's become over like the past 200 years, I think. Like, it was like the stat was in the late 1800s, the agriculture sector made up about 90 something percent of the entire labor market.
Yeah, of course.
And now it's less than 3%, and we produce, I don't even know how much more food for how much more people.
10 times more food,
Yeah.
easily. It's orders of magnitude more. Yeah.
Yeah, it's orders of magnitude more. And I think that's one of the greatest reasons to be an optimist, not just in terms of the trajectory of humanity, but in terms of our ability to progress and the advancement of technology. And you mentioned techno optimism can be easy to fall into because it allows you to do nothing. I'm curious about what you mean by that. Like, could you just expand on that some more?
Um, well, I mean, like especially around climate change, it's easy to say the problem is so vast that I can't do anything individually to meaningfully make an impact on climate change, for example, and also at the same time, because we are collectively as a species so smart and able to come up with all kinds of solutions, um, that maybe in the end what ends up happening is that energy becomes so cheap because Moore's law, largely speaking, has applied to not just semiconductors but also to solar panels, and therefore energy becomes so cheap per kilowatt hour that we in theory could use that energy to not just power our AI farms, but also to, for example, run carbon sequestration technology and suck carbon from the atmosphere and stash it underground, which would basically mean that in theory, the rest of us don't have to do a damn thing, don't have to make any sacrifices in our lives, and don't have to actually apply anything because technology will just sort of solve our problems for us. Now, there is an aspect of truth to that in many for many aspects of life, but I still think we also need to apply ourselves as well without having to just sort of ignore because both the pessimism and doomerism and the scale of some of the bigger problems that face the planet and the people on the planet, and then technology can offer this uh, sort of intoxicating um,
Catch all solution, sort of.
intoxicating solution that means, okay, well, yeah, it's so big and so daunting and so scary that I don't have to actually worry about it. I can just worry about taking my kids to soccer and planning my next vacation without having to actually do much of anything in my own personal life for these things. Which, yeah, in some ways does have some truth to it, but in other ways, we also all have agency as well. We also
Yeah.
do have a role to play, both in our decisions we make as consumers, both in how we vote, both in terms of the decisions we make in terms of, do I want to support this charity? Do I want to actually make this change in my life? So I guess what I'm saying is, I don't want people to be, mistaken to think that technology is just going to solve all of our problems, and we don't have to do anything or make any choices in our lives.
Yeah.
So I think finding that balance is useful as well.
Yeah.
Um, and not be daunted by the scale of our problem of our problems as well. And um, there's an old parable about a bunch of recently hatched turtles that are crossing the road, and they're at risk of being run over by cars, and a person's there, grabbing them and carrying them across the street, just to try and save them. And then somebody stops and says, "Why are you doing that? Because you can't save them all." And the guy says, "Well, no, but I can save this one, right? But so that's enough."
Yeah. So I want to bring it back to agency for a second because there was a point here that I wanted to make about how agency is a big through line throughout all my issues, of course.
Of course, yeah.
And in this
Other,
issue,
if you didn't think we had agency, then what would be the point of writing about how people
improve their lives.
can slowly, gradually, incrementally, through say Kaizen,
Yeah.
improve their lives? Yes.
Yeah. So this issue in particular sort of assumes people have the agency to reframe their life. But the problem is that threat bias isn't a bug, it's a feature that has kept humanity alive throughout
Mm.
generations. So what are we doing by asking people to override that's something that has been adaptive? And when is negative bias actually wisdom, or when is it actually useful?
It's a great question, yeah, because um, our ancestors who weren't all that concerned about the saber-toothed tiger didn't live on to become our ancestors. Basically,
Yeah.
they became uh, negatively selected in a Darwinian sense, I guess you might say. Yes.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's a great question in terms of, and in some ways, it's sort of relates to what you just asked me before. But when is pessimism actually rational, and when is optimism perhaps sort of foolhardy,
Or denialism.
or denialism? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, excellent question. Yeah. So when do threats? When should we ignore threats? I think in many ways it comes down to educating yourself, I guess, learning and reading. You know, I take the example of Trump and his threats. Like he's made threats towards Canada, but which would seem really shocking, except for the fact that um, he's not the first one, and he won't be the last one. I mean, I remember it was about 150 years ago, 5440 or bust. You know what they're saying. What some Americans were saying was they wanted to own a big chunk of Canada at the time, um, and all I'm saying is, yeah, the more you know about history, the more insulated you can become about actually being terribly worried um, about the threats we seem to face today, and about whether they're really all that new, or whether they're not that new. Um,
So you're
but
saying
I
that
think,
like as we sort of learn more and more about the broader scale of history and sort of humanity and when threats were actually important and needed to be worried about and when threats were kind of not that big of an issue, you sort of get an attunement or sort of like an intuition around when threats are actually, you know, something to worry about and when they're actually just like not a big deal.
yeah, in some ways, it's sort of back to the theme of your issue around gratitude, which is just it's more of attention, and in terms of the more you know, the more it helps you to frame, or perhaps reframe what seems to be threats today. And in terms of gratitude, the more you can sort of step back and think about what you should be grateful for. Um, it's basically both of which are about framing or reframing your current attention, and what seems to be a threat, and yet and helping to put this in perspective about whether this actually is a unique and real threat, or whether it's something that has been omnipresent, or something that we've been through this, and we've gone through the other side as well. So
Yeah.
I'm talking, in some ways I'm talking more societally, than individually, but I think it applies in both ways as well. So, but I think uh, yeah, I mean there are times where we need to really be worried about unique unique and particularly pessimistic things, but it helps to know a bit about history, helps to know a bit about whether we should actually take them serious or not, I guess, or whether they can be mitigated or they can be um, perhaps perhaps ignored, or at least
Secondary issues, not
yeah,
primary threats. Yeah.
exactly, yeah.
Yeah, I think as I was talking about earlier with when we were talking about agriculture, starvation, and obesity, um, I think that's one of the hardest shifts of training your attention to be more grateful is because threat bias is ingrained in us so deeply because of the fact that humanity has been living in scarcity for like 99% of its history.
Mm-hmm.
And it's only kind of recently that we're in this era of abundance where we don't really have to worry about food. We don't really have to worry about shelter. For most people, especially in developed democratic nations, like it's not really a problem. And the issue when you're living in an abundant world is that you're still on the software of the old humans that were in a scarce world. And since we've trained our brains through thousands of years of evolution to see the threats and everything to keep us alive, the hard part is that we still just see the threats everywhere, even when there are none. And that's probably one of the most challenging parts of this whole idea of gratitude. Even though gratitude has been around for a while, I mean, it's been around since like Marcus Aurelius and the Stoics in the early Roman times, but it's definitely not an easy practice. You have to work at it.
I agree. Yes,
It's almost counter natural in a sense in terms of like how humans are wired.
mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, if we are all in a perpetual state of bliss and eudaimonia, I mean, um I mean, it's almost like the Matrix in a way, where Agent Smith explains to Neo that the original version of the Matrix was perfectly harmonic, and there was no strife and there was no turmoil and there was no and
It was a utopia.
it was utopian, and the human brain basically
Rejected it.
rejected it,
It was too
uh,
perfect.
because it seemed too perfect and seemed too unrealistic, and as he said, entire crops of humans were lost as a result.
Yeah.
That we need turmoil and strife and hardship and I mean and he has there's a point there, of course, too. I mean, necessity is the mother of invention. So if we already have everything that we perceive that we need, then I mean,
What's left?
I could see how that could have a very negative impact on innovation, for example, or on technology, of course, and all sorts of other things that we need to or that helps us to move forward. So uh,
Yeah.
now we're getting into the theoretical, but yeah, it's interesting, sort of interesting thought process for sure.
Yeah. So, as a closing couple of questions here, I wanted to ask if you were to take the whole piece in as a whole and sort of push back on it, what's the thing I didn't mention in the piece, or what's an element of it that you think was missing that I didn't say that I should have?
Hmm, that's a good question, because I do think that gratitude in general is something that we don't practice enough, and I think it's something that is is actually very useful for us to to frame our to help to frame our perspective in life. So what did you not say that that really ought to have been said, I guess? Um,
Or is there just sort of an unspoken assumption within the piece that I'm not addressing?
I suppose one unspoken assumption is that in many ways it's geared, I guess, towards a, to use an old phrase, a first world audience. I guess I would say
Yeah.
it's you already have to have come from a place of dare I say abundance, or to have come from a place of where you do have things to be grateful for. And I know we all have some things to be grateful for. The folks in South Sudan right now may not agree with that. Obviously, folks in Gaza would probably not agree with that. So, I guess I would say that the one thing is that it sort of assumes a bit of a because we are part of that top 10% just by being in the country where we're at, and we're in the top 10% of 10% just by being in the time that we're at. So it sort of makes that assumption that we're in a place where we really ought to be looking around and thinking about the things we're thankful for. There are still people that are not in that place right now. So that would be the one small thing that I would say
Yeah.
that's a um, potential area, not necessarily of a shortcoming, but just in terms of it's an assumption that's made within the piece, I guess, yeah, implicitly.
Yeah,
So
I mean, it's kind of just a bias that's going to naturally be baked into it because, I mean, by the nature of what it is, I mean, it's a digital newsletter. It's going out on Substack, and this is a podcast that's going to go out on YouTube.
it's a curated audience
The types of people that are going
off the
to,
bat, yeah.
yeah, the people that are going to see it and read it and listen to it are automatically going to be part of that audience. So,
And this is no judgment upon all of you fine folks.
yeah, of course.
Fair
But yeah, it's kind of hard to get around that type of bias. And I think that's probably a bias that'll end up being in almost every issue or every
Yeah,
newsletter, every podcast, I
enough.
guess. But yeah, that's a fair point to make. So, final question. You've read
Hmm.
a lot. You advise people through financial crises and wins. What would you add to the gratitude, attention, optimism framework that I'm missing that sort of gives like additional context to it?
Good question. I think a lot of people don't realize how fortunate they actually are. I mean,
They're stuck in the red, noticing the red in their life
yeah,
a
but
little bit.
also, I mean, if you were to ask the average person with, say, $2 million in their portfolio, if they're upper class or middle class, they would still say they're middle class, even if they're making over $100,000 a year,
In dividends and stuff, yeah.
just in investments and pensions and
In P
whatnot.
and
And
L, yeah.
yeah, just um, most people don't really reframe their where they are, and this is not a criticism. This because most people still actually kind of live I have lots of clients that they make good money, but they don't like live like you would never know that they have as much money as they do because they don't live flashy. Like
They live humbly.
they live very humbly, and so I think yeah, that's one thing I've noticed is that my my clients who have wealth, they don't tend to live, and maybe it's just a cultural thing, but also it's just how we're raised
It might
and
be,
where we are, and they don't tend to live beyond their means. They don't tend to show off how wealthy. That's certainly not a goal of theirs is to try to demonstrate wealth. That's not at all. where my clients are at. They're
Yeah.
more worried helping their kids out, or helping or you know they're not all that worried about displaying their wealth. I guess what I would say, what clients should really try and take from this, is that they actually are in a better position than they think that they are, and they actually could be, they could do things like, maybe the kids of my clients won't like this, but they could, they could be more charitable, and give away more of their wealth to causes that they actually care about, and
Yeah.
and that align with their values, and to, borrow from that overused Gandhian phrase about being the change that they want to see in the world. And I think that a lot of people could actually realize that they actually have more agency than they realize that they do. So um, that's one thing I wish my clients would, and people in general would realize, is they actually can effect more change, and they can do more things with their money if they actually um, put their mind to it, and realize the opportunities that they have.
Yeah. I think that's probably, if anything else, probably the core thesis of my newsletter, to be honest, is that people have more agency than they realize. And they have more control over their own life than they realize. And it's easy to think that you don't have control and that the circumstances of your life sort of dictate more than you can deal with. But when you break it down and realize what you can actually change, even if it's just tiny things, or even just how much you can change by focusing on one small step, compounding over time, you can realize how much is truly possible to change. And it's just that you have much more agency than you realize.
I think you're bang on, and probably a good place to stop.
Yeah, I enjoyed the conversation. Thank you.
As did I. Thank you.